Kessler on WNYC. We are in our annual health convening, which WNYC hosts every year with support from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, as an opportunity for healthcare experts and practitioners to inform WNYC's health reporting. And this year, as you've been hearing for most of the show, we are, for the third year now, bringing it onto the air for all of you, as well as even as we take notes on this show and elsewhere in our news department. And we are tackling ultra-processed foods as this year's health convening topic. What are they? How do they impact our health? And how can the food system in the United States change? For our final installment today, we're joined now by Dr. David Kessler, who is perhaps best known for taking on industries that profit from addiction. As FDA Commissioner under both Presidents George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton through the 1990s, he brought tobacco executives before Congress, remember that, some of you, and argued successfully that the FDA had the authority to regulate nicotine as a drug. And now he's trying to do something similar with ultra-processed foods. Last August, Dr. Kessler filed a citizen's petition, as it's called, with the FDA, arguing that the very ingredients that make ultra-processed foods what they are, like corn syrup and maltodextrin, should no longer be considered generally recognized as safe. Now, that's a legal designation that we're going to get into with him because it's central to this conversation. Generally recognized as safe, or known by the acronym GRAS, that has allowed the food industry to introduce thousands of industrial ingredients into the food supply without formal FDA review or approval. Dr. Kessler says that loophole needs to be closed. Now, this past February, Health Secretary RFK Jr. said on 60 Minutes that the FDA would act on Dr. Kessler's petition, but he stopped short of saying the administration would regulate the ultra-processed food. So where does that leave us? Let's find out. Dr. David Kessler is also a pediatrician and a lawyer, as well as former FDA Commissioner. He's the former dean of the medical schools at Yale and UC San Francisco, and the author of multiple books on food and health, including his most recent, Food or Fiction. Dr. Kessler, so nice of you to join us. We're honored to have you. Welcome to WNYC.
Thank you for having me, Brian, and thanks for the important work you're doing.
Thank you. The core legal argument in your petition involves this thing called GRAS, or GRAS, which stands for Generally Recognized as Safe. I took a stab at defining it in the intro just now. You argue that the FDA is legally obligated to revisit it for these ingredients, so many ingredients. So what is this loophole exactly? What are you calling on the FDA to revisit?
So we are asking that the petition that we filed calls on the administration to remove processed refined carbohydrates from the food supply on the basis that, as you just said, they are no longer considered generally recognized as safe, or GRAS. Now, can I explain what GRAS is and then the reason?
Please.
For the petition? So if you want to add something to the food supply, there's a relatively high burden that Congress set back in the 1950s. If you want to add, it's called a food additive, you have to show that the additive is safe for use under the conditions it's used. So you have to show it's safe. And safety is defined as reasonable certainty of no harm, and you have to go through an entire application process. You have to study it. You have to submit petitions. You submit the food additive petition. FDA looks at that. There is an exception in the law. There was an exception that was put in. It was put in for grandfathered substances primarily. This is what is called GRAS. And if you were generally recognized as safe, then you were exempted from putting in that food additive petition. So it was, in some ways, it was the loophole that became the rule, because the majority of substances that are added to food today come in under this GRAS exception. Now, this was looked at, the GRAS status of these refined carbohydrates was looked at 4 decades ago. And it's during those 4 or 5 decades that we see this crisis that America became, the American body became ill. We became obese. It's not about weight. I mean, it's very important. Why are we doing this? Is the fact that only 12% of us are generally healthy from a metabolic perspective when you look at things like blood pressure or blood lipids or waist circumference. 25% of us will go on to have heart failure. 30% of us will become diabetic. 25% of us will have a stroke. And we're waking up to the fact, again, it's not just weight. It's that visceral fat, that fat in places in our abdomen where fat does not belong. And that's responsible. That visceral adiposity is responsible for much of the cardiorenal metabolic disease, the chronic disease, certain forms of cancer, and even neurodegenerative disease. So enormous chronic disease burden. And when this was looked at 4 decades ago, these refined carbohydrates, you go look at the Federal Register back in the 1980s, the fact that GRAS determination was based on outdated data. They did not properly establish the biological effects of these processed refined carbohydrates. The GRAS affirmation statement written back in 1988 said there was no link between these refined sweeteners and carbohydrates and obesity, no link with cardiovascular disease and diabetes. That is no longer true. So there is no expert consensus that these refined carbohydrates and ultra-processed foods are safe under the present conditions of use. And that, in my opinion, leaves FDA with no choice but to determine that processed refined carbohydrates, as a matter of science and law, can no longer considered to be GRAS and thus must be removed from commerce.
By the way, listeners, Dr. Kessler's latest book, which I meant to mention in the intro, but I mentioned an older book, is Diet, Drugs, and Dopamine, the New Science of Achieving a Healthy Weight. So to what you were just saying, Dr. Kessler, your petition to the FDA doesn't actually use the phrase ultra-processed foods. Instead, you focused on processed, refined carbohydrates. So are you saying that other things that we've talked about during this special, the things in, processed deli meats and stuff, aren't as much concern, or just that they're being regulated better already than these processed refined carbohydrates, which are falling through this giant loophole?
No, I'm just using the processed refined carbohydrates, in part because of how the Food and Drug law works, but also as markers of these ultra-processed foods. Look, in the end, we are eating about 500 to 1,000 calories more today than we did 4 decades ago. And that is because we're eating more calorie-dense, less satiating, engineered foods. The foods that were engineered for overconsumption. These were hyper palatable. You can call them ultra processed, ultra formulated. I mean, to me, a ultra processed food has 4 components. It has sweeteners, it has refined starches and flours, it has added fats and oils, and it has salt. And I'm focusing on 2 of those components, the refined sweeteners, the refined flours and starches. But that covers about 80% of all ultra-processed foods. When you walk into those central aisles, most things, if they're going to have added fats and oils and that salt, they're also going to have the refined processed carbohydrates.
And listeners, we can take a few questions from you about regulating ultra-processed foods, particularly as you're hearing from former FDA Commissioner Dr. David Kessler, these processed refined carbohydrates. But in general, 212-433-WNYC, call or text 212-433-9692. On 60 Minutes earlier this year, you said these ingredients trigger metabolic havoc. that the calories from ultra-processed foods aren't just empty, they end up as fat in the liver and migrate to other organs. What's the biological mechanism that you're describing, and how good is the evidence?
I think the evidence is very good. And the fact is that medicine is waking up to the fact that it is fat in places where fat does not belong that is responsible for much of the chronic cardiovascular, metabolic, renal disease that we're experiencing. Over the last 50 years, the United States, people in the United States have been exposed on a mass population-wide scale to something I think that our biology was never designed to handle. These energy-dense, rapidly absorbable, highly palatable, ultra-processed foods. The industry learned in the 40s and 50s to feed a hungry nation, to be able to ship food across, state lines, to have food be shelf stable, to design a whole palette of products of these rapidly absorbable, energy-dense, highly palatable foods. But no one asked the question, what is it going to do to our metabolism? And this exposure fundamentally altered, I believe, our metabolism, and it produced the largest increase in chronic disease in modern history. It includes type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, fatty liver disease, hypertension, kidney disease, abnormal blood lipids, heart attacks, strokes, and heart failure. No one asked the question, what was the effect of these ultra-processed foods on our metabolic health?
Joseph in Dover, New Jersey, has a question for you. Joseph, you're on WNYC with Dr. Kessler. Hi.
Hi, thank you for taking the call. I just want to quickly comment that the entire discussion thus far seems to focus on the ingredients in ultra-processed foods and not the word processing, which always has concerned me. I'm concerned about the effect of the method of processing, of cooking foods, I imagine, in large vats, suddenly raised to high temperatures with under pressure or steam. If I buy a jar of spaghetti sauce in the store, I'm sure it's not cooked slowly simmered the way an Italian grandma might cook it. I sometimes buy some processed products. I bought some preservative-free, what do they call it, uncured hot dogs recently, turkey hot dogs, and I only saw what looked like friendly ingredients, turkey, maybe some salt, nothing that I wouldn't use myself, but I wonder the nature of the processing might have adverse effects. That's
Great question, Joseph. Thank you very much. Dr. Kessler.
It's a very insightful question. No doubt that industrial processing weaponizes carbohydrates, these added fats and oils, at a scale that goes far beyond anything possible in home cooking. The reason why I focus on these processed refined carbohydrates is the Food and Drug Act doesn't regulate processing in the abstract. It regulates ingredients. So you can regulate ingredients that have been processed, but you have to link it to a specific substance. So that's why I'm focusing on the processed refined carbohydrates. And look, it's those processed refined carbohydrates, those rapidly absorbable carbohydrates, are being put in our bodies and absorbed at a rate. If you look over the last 20 years, there's been a doubling of hyperinsulinemia. Now I know that's a big word, but the response to those rapidly absorbable carbohydrates is the rate of rise of just putting in that sugar into our bloodstream and stimulating this metabolic chaos. That leads, right, one, to not only have us eat more and more because it stimulates the dopamine reward circuits, but it also leads to this hyperinsulinemia, this metabolic chaos. So these extra 500, 1,000 calories, this additional fat that gets deposited in our liver in places it doesn't belong, we now know that's causative. It's in the causal chain of these diseases.
So when you filed your petition with the FDA to reopen the investigation of this causality, it sounds like when you took on tobacco in the 1990s, you described finding the regulatory hook that is the legal question that framed your argument. And you said the same challenge exists here with the food industry. So since you were so central to that, back in the 90s, what happened when tobacco companies had to prove their products were safe? And what lessons do you think we should learn that might apply here at the level of the federal government?
You're exactly right. I mean, in fact, when we acted back in the 1990s, there was a citizens petition, not dissimilar from the citizens petition, that we filed here on ultra-processed food. And that petition, I mean, it asked specifically to regulate low-tar cigarettes. We actually changed the question of whether nicotine was a drug under the act. That gave us that regulatory hook under the existing statute. Here, the regulatory hook is that all these substances came on the market under this GRAS loophole. But the great thing about this GRAS, exemption is that the manufacturers have the burden. If you want to call it GRAS, if you want to come under this route, manufacturers retain that burden to show that in fact, these substances can be used and at the doses that they're being used and cumulatively with all these compounds together that they're really GRAS. So what the petition says, and what I'm asking FDA to do, is to say, okay, industry, you put all this stuff on the market under GRAS, show us the studies that show this is metabolically safe, and if not, then start to remove these.
And so Secretary Kennedy appeared in a separate interview on the same 60 Minutes episode that you were interviewed for that we mentioned before. And in response to your petition, he said the FDA would act on it. But he was careful to say that he's not proposing to regulate ultra-processed foods as a category. Here's a few seconds of that.
When you're taking on ultra-processed foods, you're also taking on powerful industries, big ag, big food. What makes you believe you will prevail?
My belief that I will prevail is because we have the president behind us.
But the president has shown himself to be pretty much against regulations. So why would he support regulating ultra-processed foods?
Well, I'm not saying that we're going to regulate ultra-processed food. Our job is to make sure that everybody understands what they're getting, to have an informed public.
RFK Jr. with CBS's Bill Whitaker. What do you make of that exchange? Is he on the bus or off the bus?
Well, I think we're going to see, the administration has not yet acted. I am hopeful that they will act. I'm told this is under active consideration. And I hope they call on the food industry to do the science, show us the science on whether these ultra-processed foods are safe or to remove them. I think one of the most important things to me, here's what I think is one of the real opportunities. I think this is an issue that we can pursue without it becoming an issue of the right or left. It's without becoming weaponized. Yes, the industry will come after us, just like tobacco. But if we can keep this clearly in mind and understand that these ultra-processed foods are contributing to that extra 1,500 or 1,000 calories to this toxic fat that is getting into our organs and causing this metabolic disease, if we can do that, I mean, if there can be a consensus from, all sides of the political, spectrum, then I think there's real opportunity. So I am hopeful.
Natasha in Ridgewood, Queens. You're on WNYC with Dr. David Kessler. Hi.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my call. My question is about how this conversation relates to the conversation around changing the school lunch program, and if there's any impact to, or like legislation that can be put forward or policy, forgive me if I'm saying the wrong words here, but to, pressure the, departments of health and education around the country to change the way that food looks in cafeterias? And I'll take my question off the air. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that's such a great question, not only in general, but for you, because I think you have a pediatrics background, don't you?
Absolutely. And this metabolic chaos that occurs, I mean, these changes occur over a lifetime. And they begin, as soon as we start consuming these ultra-processed foods and lay down this visceral adiposity. So these changes occur over a lifetime. And that's why, the caller is absolutely right. Beginning early, not only in, what we're exposed to, but what we like and what we want to put in our bodies. Look, in the end, fair to say, Brian, that tobacco, one of the great public health successes in our lifetime?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Right. I mean,
considering
we can leave aside
how far down the rate of smoking has come.
Right. I mean, leave aside vaping, that, we have that issue. But certainly when it comes to cigarettes, remarked reduction in that. How did that happen? Certainly, there was legislation, there was regulation, there was taxes. Remember the CEOs testifying. But at the end of the day, what happened, in my parents' and grandparents' generation, they viewed cigarettes as something that they wanted, something that would make them feel better. There was positively valenced, right? And when you're dealing with an addictive substance, how you view it is absolutely critical. What we did is we had this critical perceptual shift. We reversed that valence from positive to negative in this country. And so how we view these products, when we understand what the damage these ultra-processed foods are doing to our bodies and the range of diseases, sure, we need to regulate. Sure, absolutely critical that we start with a school lunch program, and that is being done. But, the fact is we need to look at these products differently.
In our last minute, as I've asked each of the guests today, one of the goals of these health convenings that we do is to inform me and my colleagues at WNYC and elsewhere in the media about the science of the topics we do these specials on, so that we do better journalism, hopefully in the future. So are there certain questions or topics that you would like to see addressed more in the general media pertaining to this?
Well, I think the earlier conversation that you had was on early onset colorectal cancer. We have to find the causative agent. I mean, and you had Kevin Hall. I mean, we have to have NIH, that budget, the kind of work that Kevin did at the NIH, getting the answers, to how these ultra-processed foods actually do their harm. I mean, we have to maintain and sustain our biomedical greatness. But the goal, I think, is, with all these controversial issues or allegedly controversial, that we talk about.
And we have 10 seconds.
Finding that consensus, Brian, that underlying consensus, that's how policy is changed.
Dr. David Kessler, who among all the things that he's done in his life is also the author of the new book, Diet, Drugs, and Dopamine, The New Science of Achieving a Healthy Weight. Thank you for sticking the landing in this health convening today. We appreciate your time so much.
Thanks for the heroic work, Brian.
And listeners, we hope this was useful for you. Journalists tuning in, we hope it was useful for you. Brian Lehrer on WNYC, that's our health convening. Stay tuned for all of it.